going to give you guys a synopsis. So I was just asked first, but I'll come back to that. So I do have these practice problems that I've got pulled up here, and they should be on here on Canvas under the practice problems folder. And then I moved all the other stuff. I just left these new ones out for kind of that final, right? So there are two sets of questions, one kind of over the first, I guess, half of what we covered since the last exam, and the second one's kind of the latter half, right? So we'll work through a couple of these problems in class the last couple of weeks. I'll go through some today, and then we'll kind of go through more of them on Monday as well. Okay, so these are kind of good questions to kind of be able to make sure you can answer. Going back through the slides, anywhere where you see kind of an eye clicker kind of heading or question that we use, those are kind of additional ones you go back through and review. Will be some good ones to make sure you can, you could solve those questions. But these will be give you a pretty good idea of the questions asked. Right? But reviewing your notes or reviewing those lecture slides would also be very helpful. Okay, but I would start with making sure you can answer all these questions. Okay, and you've got answer keys. I've got some even more detailed, not just, is it A, B, or C, but kind of the reason why kind of worked out. So those are all up there on Canvas. Does that answer your question? The other question was, is the figure out your grade tool up there? So if we go back to files, I didn't put it in a folder. It should be, looks like for some reason it's all the way down here. Oh, it's alphabetical. So figure out your grade Econ 201. So what this looks like, I've got it here as well, so I'll just pull up in the file. And you're currently, we looked at what the homepage looks like. I mentioned this, I believe, on Monday, but you've got the original days. So like, if you have any discrepancy or you thought, you weren't counted for a day, you thought you were here, feel free to contact me, let me know, and I can kind of double check things. But right now I've got kind of whatever those iClicker scores are that you can kind of see. I dropped the three lowest, and then kind of that's what's going to count towards your grade. So this iClicker grade factors in the three lowest drops.
How much did the homework boost our grade if they're 100%?
Like if you do this like complete this one today.
Yeah, and the other one.
It's hard for me to say how much it would boost. It depends on how well you've done on the other ones. So it's going to be different for everybody. Now, it's going to help keep it higher, right? Than not. Yeah. So I would make sure you're doing that. So anyways, so we can see that iClicker grade with your three lowest drop. You should be able to also see what your grade currently is in the homeworks. I'll have to add in after today that very last one, right? But you can get a good idea about where you're at even today, or after today, I'll factor that sixth homework in as well. And then we have our kind of two exam scores here. So you'll look at your grades and then input them in here. So let's say, I don't know, came to most classes, I got a lot of the iClicker points. I did a lot of the homework. I did, pretty well. I did, got quite a few right. Didn't do the greatest on, I got a C in the middle of the road exam 1. I did a little bit better on exam 2. This potential grade, you can play around with this final exam category and say, okay, like if I get a 50, I would just still be sneaking out a B minus, So that's good. If I want to know, well, what do I need to get an A? If I get a 90, well, it looks like here, based off my other exam, I'm probably going to have to do pretty well. In fact, even if I ace it, looks like I'm just going to fall short of getting an A, right? But obviously, like everyone's numbers are going to be a little bit different. If you did a little better on the homework or you did a little bit worse in the exams, you can kind of play around with like, what do I need to get these different grades in the class? Does that make sense how to use that? Any questions on that? Hopefully it's helpful. I try to do this for every class because I always, that also helps prevents me from getting a bunch of emails about, well, what if I get this? And you can use this, right? You can kind of plug in different hypothetical grades there. Okay. One thing I'll mention a little more on Monday as well. I got people asking my different classes. And it states this in the syllabus, but the way I kind of assign grades after the final will be if you get anything from let's say 83 up to an 86.99, that's a B. 87 or higher is a B plus. Anything below an 83 is a B minus, right, up to 80. And then that applies to every single kind of letter grade category, with the exception of A's over 93 is just an A. Okay. Also, originally, you might see once I first enter in the finals exams that your grade appears to be like a decimal. So you maybe could see like 89.6. So what I do throughout the semester, because, there's a variance, this works better in my stats courses to explain this, but there's a variance on all our performance. And perhaps I just missed 1 point here or there on when I was grading something, or, maybe there was a, something that you thought interpreted one way, so you answered a different way. So in order to kind of account for that, like if you were at an 89.6, how do I know that you didn't actually have a 90.3 understanding of the class, right? So I always round grades up, right? So if you're kind of on the cusp there and you're thinking about playing around with these potential grades, if you do get like an 89.6, that would get rounded up. So initially it might look like the decimal, but I'll then change them all to just be integers. Okay. Does that make sense? Are there any questions on that? Okay. So that should be, I think, we've got that last homework that's due at the end of the day today. Going to get that factored in after the due date is passed. But other than that, we should take care of everything except for kind of going through more review. Okay, we'll do that today. And then if you want to show up on Monday to do more review, I would highly suggest it. I might have a few wink moments where I've written the exam, so I might let you know like these are good things to know. Okay. So I don't think we worked through this one when we were looking at some of these practice problems prior. So this is practice problem set 5. So we're going back a little ways. So, kind of not labor market stuff. We're going to go before that to try to kind of remember what we were doing there. This was a while ago. So I've got this little society, and I've got a different number of police officers, and I have 3 different individuals benefits of having each one of those numbers of police officers. So if I wanted the marginal social benefit of 4 officers being hired, how would I find that here? So we kind of work through a similar one, and I'll have this up here. This is not the one I wanted. I did one of these, didn't work very well. So I've got what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I then got person 1, which is 100, 90, 80. I think I'll have this on the board. So how would I find that marginal social benefit as I'm writing this up there for anybody? So if I wanted to, with all these private marginal benefits, right? These are the marginal benefits to each one of these different people. So Jimmy, Lois, Clark.
Is there a change in marginal benefit, like the value of marginal benefit? So if it's Jimmy, it goes from 1 to 2 and then 100 to 90.
So we could find each person. So here, it's not like we have just the quantity for each person. We've already got their marginal benefit. So what you're thinking about is how those marginal benefits were calculated. Once we have each person's marginal benefit, which is what we have here, society's total benefit is just, well, these are the only 3 members in society. So all we do to find that marginal social benefit is we add up the marginal benefit of each person, right? If I hire 1 police officer, this is a public good. It's non-rival, non-excludable. So if person 1 gets a marginal benefit of 100, person 2 gets a marginal benefit of 80, and I'm not saying their name. So if that annoys you, I'm sorry. But person 3, right, their marginal benefit is 50. All I would do is add those up. So what? 230? I'm doing the math in my head. Yeah. 100 plus 80 plus 50, right? And then I go down to, okay, what if they hired 2 police officers? Well, they're the social benefit versus, marginal social benefit. Every single person's marginal benefit added up. It looks like there I get what? 120, so 210. And then I would kind of go through and do that for every single quantity. Now here, I'm just specifically asking about 4. I'm just kind of trying to give you kind of a comprehensive way of packing this. So I'm just adding up these marginal benefits now. So this was what?
170.
Yeah, 170. And then this one would be 150, and this one would be 80, so 130. Okay. Is it clear? I was kind of finding those, just adding up the private marginal benefit of every person in this economy, right? Every person in this society. Okay. So I found what? For 4, it was 170. Okay, so that would answer that question. Oops. So that one would be D. But if I wanted to then say, okay, if the price of a police officer is $200, then what is the efficient number of police officers for the public? So I'm going to separate this into 2 questions. right? So this is a good question to ask. So what's the socially efficient quantity? I'm gonna start out with a different question that I could ask you on the exam that might precede this. So let's say I ask the same question, what's the total number of police officers if we allow individuals to make the decision? Right? If we only allow individuals to pay for these police officers. Well, if each one costs 200, we look at the first person, are they gonna hire a police officer?
No,
If they've got to pay the whole $200, the marginal cost is way higher than the marginal benefit. Well, person two, 80 is not, even lower, so $200, they're not gonna hire you. $50, not even they're gonna hire, right? So if we allow individual private citizens to kind of make this decision, nobody's gonna employ a police officer, right? Because the cost is just way greater than just their private marginal benefit. But for society, we know that if we could have one police officer hired, society benefits by $230. The cost would be 200, there'd be a net benefit to society there, right? So for society, they're going to, if they were making a decision, hire that first officer. Will they hire a second?
yeah,
Marginal benefit of the second is greater than the cost. Will they hire the third?
no,
So we kind of stop at that equilibrium quantity of 2 for society, right? So all we're doing there is first calculating our marginal social benefit by adding up each person's private marginal benefit, right? Once we have that, we can make the efficient choice for society based off of, well, as long as the cost of that public good is less than the marginal social benefit, then we're gonna buy that good, or in this case, hire that police officer. Does that make sense there? So I'll give you a different example just to point out, like, this was an extreme case. So when I asked you if we allowed individuals to make the decision, we said we'd end up with 0. It could be like, maybe I say, I don't know, the price was 50. Well, that gets a little, actually, I'll do an easier one. I probably would do something like, let's say it was 95. Now, how many, if I allow individual citizens to make the decision, how many police officers will be hired? Well, this person won't hire any, this person won't hire any, this person would hire 1, right? That cost of 95 is now less than their marginal benefit to having the first officer, but not the second, right? So they're just gonna hire 1. So we could have a non-zero if we allowed individual citizens to make these decisions. We could end up with something other than 0 if the cost was lower. And then it would just be, here, the cost is only 95. I'm gonna hire all 6 of these officers, right? Because that cost is now significantly lower than the marginal social benefit at all these levels. So you can expect kind of questions like that in the exam where I give you a very similar table. I'm gonna ask you about marginal social benefits, but then I will also ask you, what's the kind of quantity that would result in citizens making a decision? And then if you're looking for the socially efficient quantity, what would that be? Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. And so I add in some of these questions as we're going through this for a reason. So these might be good ones to pay attention to. So let's say I'm looking at a market that looks like this. Well, I've got this private marginal benefit or demand curve, private marginal cost of my supply curve. I then have marginal social cost here. So if I'm looking at this, right, where would my socially efficient quantity be for this market? Yeah, so the quantity is going to be 33, because for society, we should be making a decision not based off the supply curve, but based off the curve that reflects everyone's cost in society, or that marginal social cost. So that's going to hit demand right up here at a quantity of 33, and the socially efficient price would be $22. Right? I think here, just wants you to identify the quantity. Yeah, so 33, right? As simple as that. Now, what if I allow this market to operate freely? What quantity will it arrive at? Yeah, where supply is equal to demand, or at that quantity of 40, right? So when I have a negative externality, what ends up happening if I allow the market to operate freely? I get a quantity that's higher than what's socially efficient. Okay? So actually, we're going to restrict that quantity there. So I don't know if this is a question later on, but what's one way I could do that? If I'm looking here, what could I use to push that quantity of 40 that the market arrives at back down to the socially efficient quantity of 33? There's actually three things technically I could do, but there's one, the best one is a tax. There's two other ones. I could use a price, not ceiling.
Lower.
Yeah, right, I want the price to be higher, right? So if I want to go from, I need to say, well, you can't charge a price below 22. So with a price floor, I can maybe push it back to that point. And I could also, this one's kind of, I don't know, it's easy to overlook, and I didn't go over very much because I'm not necessarily asked questions on it, but I could use also a quota. But I could just say there, you can't have this more than this level of production in this market. Which I'm pretty sure I heard someone talking about. I think the government still does that with milk. I think that they still place quotas on that market. So those are the three things we could see, but taxes are probably the most common, right? Commonly used. And if I put a tax on this good, what would the perfect Pagovian tax be?
It would be
A little bit tough.
5.
Quite.
Because 17 is the marginal. Or it's
Yeah,
the,
so-
like, social, it's the normal efficient, but we want to do the socially efficient, which is at 22.
Yeah, so let's think about this. So the marginal social cost is my private marginal cost plus some additional external cost. So what I'm trying to do is get my supply curve plus the tax to be equal to that. Well, that's my supply curve. So what do I need the tax to be? The value of that external cost. How can I find that from graphs like this? Well, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say, okay, look, if I was at the same quantity, here is where I'd be on my supply curve. My marginal social cost would be wherever I'm at on that supply curve, plus whatever that external cost is, or the value of that negative externality. So the difference between those two lines at the same quantity. So here, the only way I can find that is I'm at the supply, I'm on the supply curve, I'm at a value of 12, but I'm on my marginal social cost curve, I'm at a value of 22. So my external cost there would be 10. So that's the value of the perfect tax, right? Would be whatever the difference is between those lines. How do I find that difference? I look at the same quantity and see kind of what the difference is between where I'm at on my supply curve and the marginal. Do you have a question? Answer it. Okay. So what you were thinking with the value of 5 was essentially, well, what's the difference between the price the market arrives at and what the socially efficient price should be, right? But in, that difference, right, doesn't actually, it's usually going to be less than what the value of the tax that we actually need. Any questions about so we got a perfect tax. See what the other questions are. Sometimes I know that I know what questions might be better than others. So I write these practice exams. I usually haven't written the actual exam yet. So then after the fact, I know like, oh, I actually might ask something a little more like this. So that's why I go over stuff that's a little bit different. So we added those types of questions in there. Those would be good ones to know. How to determine the value of the tax. Let's say assume that we've got a public good where there's positive externalities for the consumption of that good. And we would see then if we allow the market to operate without any government intervention, do we have either a surplus or a shortage? And then how would we kind of get to that socially efficient quantity? So anytime we have positive externalities, and here I specifically said that it was a consumption externality, but that's generally how I've always modeled them for you, and that's kind of how I would expect you to know how to model them. So if we've got a positive externality, we'll just start out thinking about, I've got my supply curve, I've got my demand curve, here's my equilibrium price and quantity. Right? With a positive consumption externality, we said that when people consume this good, there's benefits to other people in society who aren't even involved in this market. So what happens in my graph?
The demand curve.
right? It's not just my private marginal benefits, it's that plus the external benefit, right? And then that would be true in every single quantity. So you kind of have this marginal social benefit curve that's like higher, right? Kind of like it looks, think about it, it's not really like shifting the demand curve, but it would be like the demand curve is kind of shifting up, right? Because it's not just the private marginal benefits, it's that plus the external benefits now. My line's a little bit off here, but hopefully you can imagine what I was trying to do. Right, so if I'm looking here, I was trying to do this. That was the value of the external benefit, right? So where is the efficient point for society? Well, now I look at not where the demand curve hits the supply curve, but where does society's benefits hit that supply curve? So this is the socially efficient quantity. So if we allow the market to operate, we're actually going to have too little or a shortage, right? Relative to that socially efficient quantity. Okay. So we've got a shortage, and then how could I fix this market? Instead of taxes, like we did for negative externalities, for these positive externalities, well, what can I do? I can give people money to consume this good. So now their private marginal benefit will be whatever it was before, plus however much that subsidy is. What should the value of the perfect subsidy be? Exactly equal to that external benefit.
So if it's like a positive externality, does that always mean it would be a shortage?
If we allow the market to operate freely, then yes, with positive, as long as if we only have a positive externality, then we end up with a shortage. We could complicate it by like if we had positive and negative externalities, but yeah, if we just have this positive externality, we end up kind of having a shortage if we allow the market to operate freely. Then when we had a negative externality, we could actually say, I didn't draw it all up here, we had it on the visual. So, here's my demand curve. Here is where the perfectly competitive market gets to. Here's where my socially efficient quantity would be. So notice when we have negative externalities, we actually have surpluses, right? The quantity ends up being too high. A little bit tricky here too. So actually, let's write this out. So this might be so we said with negative externalities, we could kind of put a kind of limiting quota. We could use a price floor, or we could use taxes to kind of push us back to that socially efficient quantity. With positive externalities, we just said we could do subsidies. What else could I do here? Yeah, so if I put a price ceiling, right, what do if I want to actually do? I actually want to increase the price. So I don't want to use a price ceiling. This one, I actually also want to use a price floor. Right. Because if I use a price ceiling and say, well, you can't charge a price above this, they'll be like, well, I'm not. Right? So both scenarios, we actually can use a price floor to kind of get to this desired point. We can use subsidies with positive externalities, taxes with negative externalities. Can't really use a quota here. I guess technically you could think about like China, and you could have like a command economy where you like force them, the companies to produce more. But for the general economies, we're thinking about like that's not something we see, right? So subsidies and price floors for positive externalities, taxes, price floors, or quotas we could see for negative externalities. Okay. Any questions? So there's one other thing I could ask you here that I don't have a questions for. But we'll go back to that negative externalities graph, and I'll kind of show you what it would look like with positive externalities as well. So with negative externalities, we said that we should be at this quantity for society, but we end up out here. We said, so what does that create? Creates an amount of, dead weight loss. So if I'm looking here, how could I find that dead weight loss? Well, it's gonna be represented by this triangle here, right? Because this was where the efficient point of society was. At every point past this, right, we're gonna end up with, actually, don't want to ask, so. But if I wanted to, I could find the area of this triangle, I thought, all right? So 40 and 33, base is 7, times the height of 10, times 1/2, right? So we could find these dead weight losses pretty easily, right? We're just finding the area of kind of those triangles here. I thought there was something else. I'm trying to think of. I'll bring it in. I'll look it over on Monday, and if I can remember another question that I feel like I had written on the exam, I'll maybe give you an example somewhere. So we just went. Oh wait, we did 9 already. Where we at in time? Okay, we should have plenty of time to get through these. So let's say once someone hunts an animal, it's no longer available for consumption. And if hunting isn't unregulated and that anybody can kind of hunt for free, so let's say we had a completely unregulated market, we would say that hunting for animals would be blank and blank, right? So if I consume this good, right, I hunt this animal, no one else can, but we would consider that this good is rival. Rival meaning like when I use it, nobody else can. If I use it, the benefit of a police officer, everybody else can still use it as well, right? But if I'm buying a hamburger and I eat it, no one else can eat that hamburger again, right? So rival, right? But if we had a completely unregulated market where anybody could go out and hunt, it would be non-excludable. So that combination, right, being rival and non-excludable, we said was a common resource, right? So we've got a common resource, rival, non-excludable. Right? Now let's instead assume that there are for every person like 100 deer, right? Then really me consuming it's technically still rival, but in that idea, like me going out and hunting will never prevent anybody else from going out and being able to hunt for food either. So if you had a high enough population of deer, you could think of it as though it's non-rival. Right.
At the same time, if you kill that deer, nobody else can kill that deer.
Yeah, so it would be, it's technically going to still be rival. But we could think about, I was trying to use this example to convey that sometimes we could start out with something that's a public good, that's non-rival, non-excludable, but the overuse of it, right, dwindling down the population of deer, well then you've got it where it really is rival, right? If I hunt in this area, there aren't enough deer for the other people in the area to hunt. Right, so you can get that when you start out with a public good, the overuse of that good will kind of turn it into a common resource. The idea we had was like a congested versus uncongested road, right? When it's uncongested, it's non-rival, but if enough people use it because it's non-excludable and non-rival, right? Everybody gets on this, you know, kind of uncongested highway. Eventually, it becomes congested, and now it is rival, and now it's a common resource, right? So we kind of talk a little bit about that, but when we have these common resources, if we let them be unregulated, we tend to get this overuse, right? Because they're not excludable. So we kind of already probably answered this one a little bit because it's related to kind of these positive externalities. So we already have this visual already up on the board for us here. So which of the following would not be true? So the first one, without government intervention, the quantity of the public good is less than the socially efficient quantity. We actually already said that earlier, right? It is. We have a shortage when we have positive externalities. So that one's okay. Public goods often experience the free rider problem. So this was the idea. We talked a little bit about this, but in the example we had, like for the police officers, those if the cost was low enough, that person who valued it the most would buy it. But then everybody else gets to use it, right? So you're always going to have like people don't want to pay for this good. They're just going to hope and rely that somebody else has a higher marginal benefit to them. Because once that good is purchased, it's not excludable, right? Once that public good is out there, once that public park or once military exists, like we're not excludable, right? So we end up with this free rider problem. So that one's true. Public goods reach a socially efficient quantity without government intervention. That's just not true about any externalities, right? The only way we can get to that social efficient quantity is through some type of government intervention if we have these externalities existing. So we know that's the answer. So the other one hopefully is true as well, which is that some public goods can become common resources when they become overused, or kind of think about these congested highways. And I mentioned that in the previous problem as well. Right? If we start out with a non-rival, non-excludable good, if it gets used enough, it potentially can be converted into rival. Right? If you limit the number of this good that's out there, or we can think about the toll road or the road example, right? The overuse just kind of changes entirely the marginal benefits to using that road. Okay. Any questions there before we keep going? So we were looking for the one that wasn't true there, which we said was, hopefully that would be like an easy question on the exam. Like, we know that we need government intervention. I then have congested public highway. This is just kind of referencing what we talked about in class, which is that if it's congested, me using it is preventing other people from really kind of getting their entire marginal benefit from that road. So we'd say it's rival. But if it's a public highway, we would say it's non-excludable, right? This would be the idea of a common resource, right? It was rival and non-excludable. Right? If instead I had an uncongested public highway, we would say that would be what? Public good. Public good. Non-rival, non-excludable. What if I had congested toll road?
It's a private good.
It's rival. Yeah, it's rival. It's excludable. It's a private good. And the other one, which I won't ask you a question on, but we have, it's not up here, would be kind of a natural monopoly. Those were goods that we said would be non-rival, right? We can all use like the same main kind of cable line, like we have to split off from it, but like there's still just one main cable line ran. So it's kind of non-rival, me using it, other people using it. But it is excludable in that, well, it's excludable that there are laws that I can't like legally tap into. If I want to legally use it, it is excludable, right? I have to pay for that service, right? So a lot of these natural monopolies for things like electricity, cable, those are what we're thinking about as being non-rival but excludable goods. Okay. And then got an example here. And I got one maybe I'll think about the top of my head based off of what I've seen this stuff in my head. So let's say we had something like this, and to be honest, I'll probably push it a little bit. If you can answer this one, then you should be really comfortable with answering the game theory questions on the exam. Okay? There's a little wrinkle in this one that might be something that's kind of tough to measure to think about. So let's assume we've got two car companies and they're trying to decide how much they can invest in research and development. If they both invest, their profits will be 6 million. And then we kind of go through the list. So let's just set this up. Right? It eventually tells us like use a normal form game, this matrix that we were looking at with game theory. So we've got Ford, and Toyota, and they can either invest or not invest. So those are kind of their two different strategy choices. You then want to think about what are the trade-offs from those different combinations of choice. So if they both invest, we said they're going to be 6 million a piece.
They both don't. No.
Yes, they both decide not to invest. Nothing changes, right? There's no change in profits, right? Neither one of us advanced. And then if one firm invests and the other doesn't, the firm that invested into the R&D gets an additional 3 million. The one that didn't will get an additional 10. So if Ford doesn't invest, but Toyota does, they can reverse engineer, or they can kind of look at what they've got out there and reproduce it. And so Ford is going to get a huge benefit because they didn't have to pay for this R&D. Toyota's right paid for all of it, but they're now having to split the market with Ford because they just kind of used their, stole their invention, so to speak, right? Or their patent, or, this is why patents are important. But like if I can reverse engineer, like once it's out there, it's pretty easy for me to kind of develop my own technology. So if we had the reverse being true, where Ford invests, but Toyota doesn't, well then Toyota is really going to benefit because they have this new good. They didn't have to pay any of the costs.
But Ford benefits a little bit, right? Just not as much. They had to pay all this huge upfront cost for research and development as well. So probably the hardest part of one like this would be kind of filling out these payoffs, but like this is how we would set it up. Player one, player two, there are two choices, right? And then given the combinations of these different choices, what are the payoffs? Okay. So how do I solve this, right? I try to figure out what each person's best response is to the other person's choice. Perfect. So if I'm here, right? If I think about Ford is choosing to invest, what's optimal for Toyota to do? Yeah, 10 million is higher than 6 million, so they would choose not to invest. If Ford is choosing not to invest, what should Toyota do? 3 million is higher than 0, so they should actually choose to invest. Remember, we're kind of basing this off of payoffs here. 0 is not good, right? If 0 is less than 3 million, so they would choose to invest. We would then do the exact same thing. Let's say that Toyota decided not to invest. What should Ford do? Not invest. And then if they're investing, what should Ford do? Not invest. So here we end up with multiple equilibrium, which is that, and we can't really say which one we're going to end up with, but we know we'll end up in a scenario where one of these firms decides to invest, and as a result, the other one does not, chooses not to invest either, right? Because they know the other person invested, then they're going to be able to benefit from that. Why put all the money in research and development themselves, right? But if they're making these decisions simultaneously, they're not kind of really sure which one of these we're going to end up with. But over time, we're going to end up in a scenario where one of these companies is spending money on research and development, the other's not. There's no incentive to kind of deviate from that. So how could I maybe fix this? Well, what if I use patents, right? Where I say, if you illegally steal this, we're going to make a really huge fine, right? So even though you stole this, you made all this money, we're also going to charge you a $20 million fine. Now, if I don't invest and I use this technology, I'm paying this huge fine. So it didn't matter that I increased my profits, I had to pay an even larger fine. Now the optimal decisions would go at here, right? Well, what would Toyota choose? Or sorry, what would where did I write this?
That's Ford, not invest.
Did I replace the wrong thing?
No.
Oh, so here, now we're thinking about what's optimal.
Between 3 and 4.
If you did that one, this one. I think I have this one. So if they choose not to invest, what I want them to do is also not invest. But their optimal decision should be, yeah. There we go. So let's say that Toyota chooses to invest. Now what should Ford do? They should choose here. Now, if Ford chooses to invest, what should Toyota do? Here. So these two will stay the same. But now our best response has changed. So now we end up with, if we have these huge costs, right? If you violate patents, now we end up with an equilibrium where both sides are invested, right? So kind of before, maybe we had this unequitable situation, these equilibriums where one person was investing, one of them was investing, one wasn't. After I impose these huge kind of costs or fees, if you break this patent, I can force kind of both of them to then start putting money into research and development, which here is good because it's actually better for society. Right? There's kind of both companies now kind of coming up with these new inventions or these new products. So I wouldn't maybe push you that far in the example. It's kind of what I want to mention, like it's a real world application like that. I would see these big patents and cost by it. So let's see if I can do this one off the top of my head. I was listening to someone talk earlier. So I think so I'm sure everyone's heard of like mutually assured destruction, right? Like with nuclear war. So you kind of think about this as the only way that's truly a normal form game where it's not sequential, where they're simultaneously making decisions, is if I set enough missiles that there could never be a response by the other country. That's not really realistic because as soon as I fire a missile or as soon as there's one in, the air, it can be detected, right? And there can be an immediate response, right? So we really think about this as there's like a choice or a sequential game, which is, I don't know, let's use Russia. Right? So let's say they have two choices, right? They can send nuclear bombs over to the US or not. Right? Well, as a response, if they fire off these nuclear weapons, what's the US going to do? Well, it can either send bombs back or not. If Russia bombs the US, but the US decides not to retaliate, what's the end result? Well, if player one is Russia, we can think about it as like, I don't know, 100 billion to negative 100 billion, right? I mean, we're dead, and they, there's all the gain in the world to them. They take over the world, right? So good scenario here. If the US decide to send a bomb, then we can kind of think about like, yeah, both are going to be negative 100 billion, right? In fact, maybe if we both bomb, it's not just one bombing, right? It's kind of repeated. So we actually could think about it as if we're both bombing each other, there's actually even greater losses, right? If only one of us bombs and the other doesn't respond, like it's over pretty quickly. The losses are huge to one side, but right, the war is over, right? There's no continuation. So we would think the payoffs if we both kind of decide to bomb each other much, much larger. We then think about, okay, what if they don't? Right? What does the US do? They can choose either to bomb Russia or not, right? If we both choose not to bomb each other, like what you think about here, this is like really good, right? Now we're not in conflict, we're trading with each other, like things that we can both benefit greatly if we both decide not to bomb each other. If instead the US decides to bomb, we think about, well, Russia, that's really bad because they decided not to, right? But here, they have the other one. So we just think about like the US kind of takes over, right? But we don't have this simultaneously bombing, so we don't have these huge payoffs. So how do we solve these kind of extensive form games? Well, what we think about first is what's player two's best response? Well, here, if we live in peace as opposed to war, things are better. Over here, well, if I decide to kind of get into this retaliatory, I guess, behavior, it's like maybe it would actually be not to, be best not to respond. Now, in practice, I could play around with this and think about like, if we're both bombing each other, maybe there's, what even if the costs are lower, we'll see it end up not mattering, right? As long as things are really good when we both go bomb. So here's player one's best responses. What's player two's? That blue marker. That was player two's best response. What's player one's now best response as a result of that? Well, they know if they don't bomb the US, the US would not bomb. They know if they bomb the US would still choose not to bomb, but my payoff under that scenario, not near as large as the payoff under the other scenario. So we kind of had this idea of like, if I looked at this, I circled both of these, I didn't want to do that. I was just showing you that, right? This payment is way larger than this payment. So which one's better? This scenario, so we see both sides kind of choosing not to bomb each other, right? Because the gains are so great to us both being at peace and cooperating, that it would really make no sense for us to kind of end up with any of the payoffs over here on the other side. Like I said, we can play around these differently. Like, let's think about instead of like nuclear bombing where like everything's wiped out, you could just think about like if we attack each other, right? And so then maybe you get a flip here where it's like, if I decide to respond, maybe it's not near as bad for me. But it doesn't really matter because as long as you have like negative payoffs over here, if things are good when we're both at peace, right? We're both using, trading with each other. We typically see these kind of countries resort to like not conflict, right? But I don't know, it's also a way for me to kind of give you an extensive form game, right? Where we first solve for the second person, and as a result, the first person knows the two outcomes of either of their choices, what's best for player one. Okay? Questions for me? All right, so we'll probably kind of pick up, we've really worked through all the practice problems on 5, we'll do practice problem 6, finish those up. If you have any other questions on Monday, I can kind of start with those as well. Other than that, a fun, safe weekend, and I'll see you guys on Monday. Day or 2 to 4, right?
So I don't have office hours on Friday. Yeah. So it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday are the only times, or Monday, Wednesday, Thursday are the 3 days.